There is a place where the sun goes silent. Not dark, not empty. Silent. A boundary so far from home that sunlight, the same light that warms your skin, that took 8 minutes to reach the Earth, takes more than a full day to arrive. And when it finally does, it arrives weak, cold, a pale ghost of the star that gave you life. This is the edge, and nothing about it is what you were taught. You were told the solar system ends at Pluto, a neat little diagram. 8 planets, maybe 9, spinning in tidy circles around a friendly yellow star. A closed system, a finished map. That map is a lie. The truth is far stranger and far more disturbing, because the real boundary of our solar system is not a line. It is not a wall. It is a vast, invisible, shifting frontier that no human eye has ever seen, that no spacecraft has ever fully crossed, and that science, even now, cannot fully explain. We know it is out there. We just don't know what it is. Let me show you something that should not be possible. Right now, as you breathe, as you sit in the warmth of an ordinary afternoon, there are 2 objects built by human hands, traveling through a region so alien that our physics begins to break down at its threshold. They were launched nearly 50 years ago. They are the farthest things our species has ever touched. And when they crossed the first great boundary at the edge of the sun's influence, they sent back a signal that stunned every scientist who read it. The pressure spiked, the particles vanished, the magnetic field twisted in a direction no model had predicted. And then, silence of a new kind. A wall of interstellar plasma, a membrane between our world and everything else. We call it the heliopause, and it is only the beginning of the mystery. Because beyond the heliopause lies something so immense that the human mind cannot hold it. A structure so large that the 8 planets you learned in school, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, fit inside it the way a single grain of sand fits inside a cathedral. I want you to feel the scale of this. Truly feel it. If the distance from the Earth to the Sun were shrunk down to the width of a single human hair, one hair, then the outer boundary of our solar system would still be nearly a mile away. One hair versus a mile. That is the ratio of what you know to what you don't. And out there in that dark and frozen mile, something waits. Not a monster, not a myth. Something colder and more unsettling than any story. A shell of unknown objects, drifting in a night so complete that the sun becomes just another star among billions. Indistinguishable, forgotten, one flickering point in an ocean of them. This is where the solar system truly ends. And this is where the questions begin. Consider what we're actually dealing with. The sun is not a passive light in the sky. It is a raging furnace, blowing a constant storm of charged particles outward in every direction at 1,000,000 miles per hour. This storm, the solar wind, carves out a bubble in the galaxy, a protective cocoon. Inside that bubble, we are shielded, sheltered, held. Outside it, we are exposed to the raw radiation of the galaxy, to cosmic rays fired from dying stars and black holes across unimaginable distances, to the cold, unfiltered truth of interstellar space. That bubble has a name: the heliosphere, and its outer skin, that trembling, shifting membrane where the solar wind finally loses its war against the galaxy, is the first thing that greets you at the end of the solar system. But here is what should keep you awake tonight. We do not know its shape. For decades, we imagined it as a perfect sphere. elegant, symmetrical, a great glowing orb around our star. Then the data came back, and the sphere collapsed into something else. Some measurements suggest a comet-like tail, stretched and dragging behind us as the sun plows through the galaxy. Others suggest a crescent, a croissant, a shape with no name, folding and warping in ways our equations refuse to settle. We built the models. The models disagree, the edge of our own home, and we cannot even agree on its silhouette. Now go deeper. Push past the heliopause, past the plasma wall, into the true dark. Here the sun's grip weakens, but does not vanish. Its gravity still reaches, faint, patient, unrelenting, pulling on objects so distant that a single orbit around the sun takes not years, not centuries, but millions of years. Think about that. An object out there, right now, is completing an orbit it began before humans existed, before language, before fire. It has been falling around our sun since our ancestors were something that could not yet stand upright. And it will not complete that single lap until long after every trace of us is gone. That is the time scale of the edge. That is the patience of the dark. And within that dark hangs the greatest unsolved structure in our cosmic neighborhood. A vast spherical cloud of frozen bodies. Billions of them, perhaps trillions, wrapping the entire solar system. Like a shell of ice and shadow, comets sleep there. Ancient, pristine, untouched since the birth of the sun. Fossils from the moment of creation, preserved in a deep freeze so perfect that they remember what the young solar system was made of 4.5 billion years ago. We have never seen this shell directly. Not one image, not one photograph, not a single confirmed glimpse. We know it exists only by its whispers. The rare comet that falls inward from the dark, plunging toward the sun on a journey that began in a place we cannot observe, cannot map, and can barely comprehend. The edge of the solar system is the largest thing that belongs to us. And it is completely, utterly invisible. Let that settle. We have mapped the ocean floor. We have photographed the surface of distant worlds. We have listened to the echo of the universe's first light. And yet, the outer boundary of our own cosmic home remains a rumor. A place defined not by what we see, but by what we cannot. And there is one more thing. One question that hangs over all of it. A shadow behind the shadow. Because some of the objects out there move wrong. Their orbits tilt in strange, clustered patterns. They lean as though pulled by something we cannot detect. Something massive. Something dark, hiding in the outer black, silent and unseen, tugging at the fabric of the far solar system with a gravity that shouldn't be there. A hidden world, perhaps, or something we don't yet have a word for. This is the mystery we are about to enter. Not a fairy tale, not a fabrication. Real science, standing at the edge of its own understanding, staring into the dark and admitting the most terrifying words a scientist can say. We don't know. We don't know what shapes the boundary. We don't know what lurks beyond it. We don't know what is pulling on the distant worlds. And we don't know, not truly, where our solar system ends. So come with me, out past the planets, past the frozen wanderers, past the plasma wall where sunlight goes to die, out to the trembling edge of everything we call home. Because what waits at the end of the solar system is not empty. It is not silent. And it is watching the dark just as surely as we are. The journey outward begins now. To understand the end of the solar system, you must first understand the wind. not the wind you know, not the breeze that moves the trees or fills a sail. This is a different wind entirely, a river of fire and charged matter, pouring out of the sun in every direction at once, endless, invisible, and older than the earth beneath your feet. It never stops. It has never stopped. For 4.5 billion years, the sun has been exhaling, a steady breath of electrons and protons stripped from the surface of the star and flung into the void at speeds that defy comprehension. 1,000,000 miles per hour, sometimes more. This is the solar wind, and it is the architect of everything at the edge. Picture a swimmer moving upstream against a current. As long as the swimmer is strong, the water bends around them. It parts, it yields. But there is always a point, a distance, where strength runs out, where the current wins, where the swimmer can push no further, and the river closes back over the space they tried to hold. The solar wind is that swimmer, and the galaxy is the river. Out there, in the deep dark between the stars, space is not truly empty. It is filled thinly, almost imperceptibly, with the interstellar medium. A haze of gas and dust and cosmic debris drifting between the stars, the raw material from which new suns are born. It is unimaginably sparse. A few atoms per cubic centimeter, emptier than the finest vacuum a human laboratory can produce. And yet, across the vastness of space, even that near nothing has power. The solar wind races outward, confident, unstoppable, until it slams into this galactic haze. And somewhere far beyond Neptune, far beyond Pluto, the wind begins to lose. Not all at once. Gradually, the way a shout fades into silence across a canyon. The first thing that happens is a shock. We call it the termination shock. It is the place where the solar wind, screaming outward at supersonic speed, suddenly crashes into the resistance of interstellar space and slows violently, abruptly, to a crawl. Imagine a car traveling at highway speed striking an invisible wall of thick water. The particles pile up, they heat, they compress. The smooth outward flow becomes turbulent, chaotic, hot. 2 spacecraft have crossed this boundary. Only 2, and when they did, they recorded temperatures soaring into the tens of thousands of degrees. And yet the space there is so empty that this searing heat could never warm you. Heat out there is not what you feel on your skin. It is the frantic motion of scattered particles, moving fast in a place so vacant that they almost never touch anything at all. This is your first lesson at the edge. The rules change, the intuitions you carry, about heat, about cold, about pressure and motion. They were forged in the thick, warm, forgiving air of Earth. Out here, they betray you. A place can be thousands of degrees and still freeze you solid. A wind can blow at 1,000,000 miles per hour and be softer than a whisper. The universe does not owe you your intuitions. It never did. Beyond the termination shock lies a stranger region still. The helios sheath. This is the turbulent frontier, the churning, unsettled zone where the slowed solar wind gathers and swirls before making its final stand. Think of it as the foam at the edge of a wave, where the ocean meets the shore. It is a place of confusion and eddies, of magnetic fields tangling like threads pulled loose from a fraying cloth. The particles here no longer rush outward. They pool, they pile, they drift sideways, caught between the dying breath of the sun and the pressing weight of the galaxy. And then, the wall, the heliopause, This is the true membrane, the final skin of the bubble, the place where the solar wind, at long last, can push no further, where the pressure of the sun's breath exactly balances the pressure of the galaxy pushing back. Beyond this line, the sun's wind does not reach. It cannot. It has spent every ounce of its strength, crossed the heliopause, and you have left the domain of the sun. You are, in the truest physical sense, no longer inside the solar system's atmosphere. You are in interstellar space. You are somewhere else. And here is where the mystery deepens into something almost unbearable. When our two distant travelers crossed this boundary, years apart in different directions, they recorded something no one had predicted. The transition was sharp, startlingly sharp, not a gradual fade, but an edge, a line. In a matter of days, the character of space itself transformed. The warm, sparse particles of the sun's domain gave way to the cold, dense plasma of the galaxy. The density jumped, the magnetic field shifted, and the models, the careful, elegant equations built over decades, did not match what came back. We had imagined a smooth handoff. We found a cliff. We had imagined the magnetic field beyond the wall would twist to a new angle. Instead, it held nearly the same direction. A coincidence or a clue that we still cannot fully explain. Think about what this means. We sent two probes across the most distant boundary humanity has ever reached, and both of them returned data that broke our expectations. Not because our science was foolish, but because the edge of the solar system is a place we have never been able to study from within. Every model was a guess, an educated, brilliant, careful guess, and reality, as it so often does, proved stranger than the guess. This is the humility the edge demands. We are a species that has split the atom and photographed the birth of galaxies. And still, at the doorstep of our own home, we are like children pressing our faces to a frosted window, able to see that something is there, unable to make out its true shape. And consider the loneliness of that membrane. The heliopause is not a fixed thing. It breathes. When the sun grows active, when its storms intensify, the wind pushes harder and the bubble swells outward. When the sun quiets, the galaxy presses in and the boundary retreats. It pulses slowly over years and decades. A living shell, expanding and contracting around us like the wall of an enormous, invisible lung. We live inside a breathing thing. Every human who has ever lived, every empire, every war, every love, every loss, all of it contained within a single fragile bubble blown by a star. A bubble whose skin trembles and shifts at a distance so vast that light itself needs nearly a day to reach it. And beyond that skin, only the galaxy. Cold, immense, indifferent. There is a strange comfort in the heliosphere once you understand it. It is a shield. It deflects the worst of the cosmic radiation that streams through interstellar space. The high-energy particles born in supernovae and hurled across the galaxy for millions of years. Without the sun's wind holding that bubble open, far more of that radiation would rain down upon the Earth. Our shelter is not the atmosphere alone. It is not the magnetic field of our planet alone. It is also this vast, invisible cocoon, this dome of dying wind, stretched across billions of miles to keep the galaxy at bay. We are protected by the exhalation of a star. And one day, far in the future, when the sun ages and changes and its wind weakens, that shelter will falter. The bubble will shrink, The galaxy will press closer. It is a reminder written into the physics of everything. Nothing that protects us is permanent. Not the ground, not the sky, not even the invisible boundary at the end of the solar system. But the dying wind is only the first frontier. Beyond the heliopause, past the last breath of the sun, the true dark begins. And in that dark hangs a graveyard of frozen worlds, silent, ancient, waiting. That is where we go next. Cross the wall of dying wind, and you enter a cemetery, not of the dead, of the unborn. Out here, in the deep cold beyond the sun's last breath, drift the remnants of a world that never finished forming, frozen bodies, countless, scattered across a distance so vast that light struggles to bridge it. This is the realm of the ice, and it holds a secret about our own beginning that nothing on Earth could ever tell us. But before the true edge, there is a threshold, a first ring of the graveyard. We call it the Kuiper Belt. Imagine a vast, flattened disk of frozen debris, beginning just past the orbit of Neptune and stretching outward into the dark. Not a belt of rock, like the one between Mars and Jupiter. A belt of ice. Millions of bodies. Some small as boulders, some large enough to be worlds in their own right. Orbiting the sun in the frozen silence of the outer system. Pluto lives here. For decades, we called it the ninth planet. The final outpost. The last stop before the void. And then we looked closer and discovered that Pluto was not alone. It was not special. It was not the edge. It was simply one of the largest members of an enormous swarm, one frozen wanderer among a multitude. This is a humbling pattern in astronomy. Again and again, we place ourselves, or our familiar landmarks, at the center, at the boundary, at the end. And again, the universe reveals a vaster truth. The Earth was not the center of the cosmos. The Sun was not the center of the galaxy. And Pluto was not the edge of the solar system. We are always smaller than we thought. The end is always farther than we imagined. The bodies of the Kuiper Belt are ancient. They are the leftover bricks of creation, the material that never came together to build a planet. Out here, so far from the warmth of the young sun, the disk of gas and dust that formed the solar system was too thin, too cold, too slow. The bricks were laid, but the wall was never built. And so they remain, frozen fragments, preserved for 4.5 billion years, in a stillness so complete that they have barely changed since the day they formed. To touch one would be to touch the past, not a symbol of the past, the actual past. Matter unchanged since before the Earth had oceans, since before the sun had settled into its steady burn. A frozen photograph of the moment our solar system was born, waiting, patient in the dark. One such body we have finally seen, up close, a small, distant world, farther than Pluto, glimpsed by a spacecraft that traveled for years to reach it. And what it found stunned everyone. 2 lobes, joined together. 2 separate objects that had drifted so gently, so slowly, that when they finally met, they did not shatter. They kissed. They merged. A union in slow motion, taking place in a cold so deep and a stillness so perfect that violence itself became impossible. That is the tempo of the outer dark. Everything here moves slowly. Everything here waits. Time itself seems to thicken and stretch, the way honey pours slower than water. A single orbit in the Kuiper Belt takes centuries. The seasons, if you could call them that, unfold across spans longer than human civilization. to live out here would be to live inside geologic time, where a human lifetime is less than a blink. And there is a deeper vertigo in this. We think of ourselves as living in the solar system, a finished, populated place, a home fully known. But the truth is that most of what belongs to the sun is out here, in the frozen dark, in a graveyard we have barely begun to explore. The planets, the warm, bright, familiar worlds, are the exception. The rule is ice. The rule is silence. The rule is distance beyond comprehension. Home is mostly a place we have never seen. But the Kuiper Belt is not the end. It is only the first ring of the graveyard. Beyond it, the frozen bodies grow sparser, stranger, more distant. And here we encounter one of the most unsettling objects ever found. A world that should not exist where it does. We call it Sedna. Sedna orbits the sun in a path so extreme, so elongated, that it defies easy explanation. At its closest, it is already far beyond the Kuiper Belt. At its farthest, it plunges into a darkness so remote that a single orbit takes more than 10,000 years to complete. Think of that. When Sedna last occupied its current position in space, the last ice age was ending on Earth. Mammoths still walked. Humans had not yet planted a single seed. Sedna has not completed one lap of the sun in all of recorded history. And Sedna raises a terrible question. What put it there? Its orbit never brings it close enough to the known planets for their gravity to have flung it out. It occupies a strange, empty zone. Too far to be part of the Kuiper Belt, too bound to be truly free. Something shaped its path. Something we cannot see. Perhaps a star that passed close to the sun billions of years ago in the crowded nursery where our sun was born. Perhaps something else. Something still out there. Sedna is a fingerprint left by an unknown hand. And it is not alone. A small growing family of these distant objects has been found. Worlds on stretched, tilted, clustered orbits that hint at a hidden order. A pattern in the chaos, as though something massive and unseen has been herding them, slowly, across the ages, into an alignment that should not occur by chance. We will return to that shadow. For now, hold the mystery, because beyond Sedna, beyond the last scattered ice, lies the true edge of the graveyard, a structure so vast that it dwarfs everything we have described. A shell of comets wrapping the entire solar system, reaching outward across a distance so immense that it approaches the space between the stars themselves. But consider first what the graveyard means. These frozen bodies are not merely debris. They are messengers. When one of them is disturbed, nudged by a passing gravity, tipped from its ancient rest, it can fall inward, tumbling toward the sun across thousands of years. And as it approaches the warmth, the ice begins to boil. A tail erupts. A glowing veil of gas and dust streams behind it, catching the sunlight, blazing across the sky. A comet. Every comet you have ever seen, every streak of light that ancient peoples took as an omen of doom or a message from the gods. Every one of them is a visitor from the frozen graveyard. A fragment of the beginning, thawing before your eyes. A piece of the outer dark, briefly close enough to touch the light, before it swings around the sun and returns to the deep, not to be seen again for centuries, or millennia, or ever. The comets are letters from the edge, and they carry, frozen in their ice, the chemistry of creation, water, carbon, the raw ingredients of life itself. Some believe that comets, crashing into the young Earth, delivered the very water that fills our oceans, that the seas were seeded from the frozen graveyard at the end of the solar system. that we are, in some quiet and literal way, children of the ice. Look at the ocean, and you may be looking at the edge of the solar system, returned home. We are more connected to the frozen dark than we ever knew. The water in your body, the water in every living thing, some of it may have begun out there, in the silence beyond the wind, in the graveyard of the unborn worlds. And beyond even Sedna, one final structure remains, the greatest and most mysterious of all, a vast spherical shell of comets wrapping the sun in a shroud of ice. That is where we go next. Now leave the disk behind. Everything you have seen so far, the planets, the Kuiper Belt, even distant Sedna, lies more or less flat. A great spinning plate, all the worlds circling in roughly the same plane, like horses on a carousel. That is the solar system, you know. Flat, ordered, turning. Forget it, because the true edge is not a disk at all. It is a sphere. Wrap your mind around this, if you can. Surrounding the entire solar system, above it, below it, in every direction at once, hangs an immense spherical shell of frozen bodies. Not a ring, not a belt, a ball, a hollow globe of ice, enclosing the sun and all its worlds, the way a shell encloses the yolk of an egg. This is the Oort Cloud, and it is the largest structure that belongs to our sun. We have never seen it, not once. No telescope has ever imaged it. No spacecraft has ever reached it, nor will one for tens of thousands of years. It has never been photographed, never been mapped, never been directly confirmed. And yet, we are almost certain it is there. We know it the way you know, for there is a room behind a closed door by the sound of movement within. We know it by its children, the long-period comets that fall inward from every direction of the sky, dropping toward the sun from a source that can only be a vast, spherical reservoir wrapped around us all. Let me give you the scale. Then brace yourself, because scale is where the mind begins to fail. The heliopause, the wall of dying wind, the edge we spent 2 blocks reaching, lies at a certain distance from the sun. The Oort Cloud begins hundreds of times farther out. And its outer edge? It may reach a quarter of the way to the nearest star, a quarter of the way to another sun. The gulf between stars is so vast that we measure it in the years light takes to cross it. And light is the fastest thing that exists. And this shell, this shroud of ice, reaches so far into that gulf that it begins to blur the very meaning of the word home. Where does our solar system end and interstellar space begin? When our own comets drift a quarter of the way to Alpha Centauri. The boundary is not a line. It is a fading, a slow dissolve into the dark. Within this shell drift perhaps 1 trillion frozen bodies. 1 trillion. A number so large it has no meaning to human intuition. If you tried to count them, one every second, without sleeping, without stopping, you would die tens of thousands of years before you finished. And each of these bodies is a mountain of ice, silent, dark, unimaginably far from its neighbors. And here is what haunts me most. The Oort Cloud is nearly empty. Yes, 1 trillion objects. And yet they are spread across a volume so vast that the space between them is measured in the distances between planets. Each frozen mountain drifts alone, in a darkness so complete that its nearest sibling is millions of miles away, often much more. If you stood upon one of these bodies and looked out, you would see no other, only the black, only the scattered, unblinking stars. And somewhere among them, indistinguishable from the rest, a single point of light no brighter than the others. The sun. From the Oort Cloud, our sun is just a star. Sit with that. The star that rules your entire world, that dictates your days and nights, your seasons, your very existence. From the edge of its own domain, it is nothing. A pale dot, one light among thousands. You could not pick it out without a map. You would not know it was special. You would not know that around that faint and unremarkable point circled a small blue world, where beings once looked up and wondered what lay at the edge of everything. This is the great vertigo of the outer dark. It strips away our centrality. It takes the sun, the center of our lives, the source of all our warmth, and shows it to us as the universe sees it. Small, ordinary, lost in the crowd. And if the sun is nothing from the edge of its own realm, then what are we? What is the earth, the blue speck circling the pale dot? What are our cities, our histories, our names? The Oort Cloud does not answer. It only drifts, silent and vast, indifferent to the question. And yet, there is a strange intimacy here too. Because these frozen bodies, so remote, so alien, are also the oldest untouched relics of our own birth. They formed close to the sun, in the warm chaos of the young solar system, and were then flung outward, hurled into the deep by the gravity of the newborn giant planets. Jupiter and its siblings still forming, slinging the leftover ice into the dark like a great gravitational catapult. What we see at the edge is exile. A trillion fragments banished from the warmth of home in the solar system's violent youth and carried to the very brink of interstellar space. The edge is not separate from us. The edge is us, cast out, frozen, preserved. And this shell of shadow is fragile in a way that should unsettle you. The Oort Cloud is so far from the sun that the sun's grip on it is faint, feeble. A trillion bodies held by a whisper of gravity. And that means they are vulnerable, not to us, but to the galaxy. As the sun drifts through the Milky Way, it does not travel alone. Other stars pass by, not close by human standards. But across the ages, they come near enough. And when a star passes close to the Oort Cloud, its gravity reaches in and stirs the shell like a hand disturbing still water. A passing star can rain comets down upon us. It has happened before. It will happen again. Somewhere in the long history of the Earth, a distant star drifted near, and the tremor of its passing loosened a swarm of frozen bodies from the shell of shadow, sending them tumbling inward across thousands of years, toward the sun, toward the planets, toward us. Some scientists believe that such comet storms, triggered by the slow ballet of passing stars, may have scarred the Earth in ages past, that the edge of the solar system and the fate of life upon this planet are bound together by threads of gravity stretching across light years. The dark is not as separate as it seems. What happens at the edge can reach the center. A star we cannot yet name, drifting somewhere in the galactic night, may already be bending toward our shell of shadow. And in some distant epoch, its passage may send a frozen mountain falling toward a world that does not yet know it is watching. This is the paradox of the Oort Cloud. It is the farthest, coldest, loneliest structure we possess. And yet, it is a doorway, a porous boundary through which the galaxy can reach in and touch us, a membrane between our small, warm world and the vast, slow, indifferent machinery of the Milky Way. And it raises the question we have been circling since the beginning. If the edge is this vast, if it reaches a quarter of the way to another star, then is there truly an edge at all? Where does the sun's realm end and the galaxies begin? Perhaps there is no clean line. Perhaps home simply fades, thinning into the dark until one frozen body belongs more to the space between stars than to the sun that made it. The solar system may not end. It may only dissolve. But there is one more mystery waiting in that dissolving dark. A shadow behind the shell, something that pulls on the distant worlds. Something massive, unseen, and still unexplained. That is where we go next. Something is out there. We cannot see it. We cannot photograph it. We do not know its name. But we can feel its presence. Not with our hands, not with our eyes, but through the slow, patient mathematics of gravity. Because far out in the frozen dark, a handful of distant worlds are moving wrong. And the only explanation that fits is a shadow with mass. Let me tell you what we found. Remember Sedna, the exile on its 10,000-year orbit? Sedna is not alone. Over the years, astronomers have discovered a small family of extremely distant objects, all orbiting the sun far beyond the Kuiper Belt, out in the lonely space before the Oort Cloud. And when these orbits were laid side by side, something strange emerged from the data. They lean the same way, their long stretched orbits, their elongated paths around the sun, all tilt in a similar direction, all cluster in a similar orientation. As though someone had taken a handful of arrows, scattered across a vast field, and found that every one of them pointed toward the same distant horizon. This should not happen. By chance alone, these orbits should point every which way. A random scatter with no order, no alignment. Instead, they huddled together, tilted and clustered, whispering of a hidden influence. And when you find order where you expect chaos, science demands an explanation. Order does not appear from nothing. Something imposed it. Something is hurting them. The leading answer, the one that has haunted astronomers for years, is a world, a ninth planet. Not the small, dismissed Pluto, but something far larger, a giant several times the mass of the Earth, orbiting the sun in the profound dark far beyond everything we have mapped. So distant that its single orbit might take 10,000, perhaps 20,000 years. So faint, so far from the sun's light, that it has thus far escaped every telescope trained upon the sky. A planet the size of a world we could stand upon, hidden in our own solar system in the 21st century. Think about the audacity of that idea. We have mapped the ocean floors. We have counted galaxies by the billions. We have detected the faint gravitational tremors of black holes colliding 1 billion light years away. And yet, it is possible, genuinely possible, that a massive planet circles our own sun, unseen, undiscovered, betraying its existence only through the gentle tug it exerts on a few distant fragments of ice. If it is real, it is the ultimate hidden thing. A world in our own house that we have never met. Why can we not see it? Because at such distances, sunlight is a ghost. A planet out there would receive almost no light from the sun and reflect back almost none. It would be a dark object against a dark sky, moving so slowly across the heavens that its motion would be nearly imperceptible. We are searching for a black cat in a coal cellar, and the cellar is the size of the sky. But the hunt is on. Telescopes sweep the darkness where the mathematics says it should be. Night after night, the sky is scanned and compared and scanned again, searching for a faint point of light that moves. And one day, perhaps soon, A new telescope with an eye vast enough to drink in the faintest glimmers may finally catch it. A pale dot creeping across the stars. And the ninth planet, if it exists, will step out of the shadow and into the light of human knowledge. Or it will not. Because there is another possibility, and it is stranger still. Some have wondered whether the unseen hand is not a planet at all, but something far more exotic. A remnant of the universe's violent birth. A tiny black hole formed in the first moments after the beginning of everything. Small enough to hold in your imagination, and yet heavier than many Earths. Such a thing, if it drifted into the sun's embrace long ago, would be utterly invisible, emitting no light, reflecting none, betraying itself only through gravity. It would be a wound in space, a knot of pure mass, silent and black, tugging at the distant worlds from the deep. We do not know if such things exist, but we cannot yet rule it out. Sit with that uncertainty. At the edge of our own solar system, the choices before us are a hidden planet or a primordial black hole, and we cannot currently say which. This is not the frontier of some distant galaxy. This is home, and home still hides a secret massive enough to move worlds. And there is a humbling lesson buried in this hunt. This is not the first time gravity has revealed the invisible. Long ago, astronomers watched the planet Uranus wander slightly off its predicted path. Something was pulling it. They did the mathematics and predicted, from the tug alone, the existence and the location of an unseen world. They pointed their telescope at the calculated spot in the sky. And there it was. Neptune, a planet discovered not by looking, but by reasoning. Found in the equations before it was ever found in the sky. Gravity betrayed Neptune, and gravity may now be betraying something farther still. This is one of the most profound truths in all of science. The universe is not limited to what we can see. Vast realms of it are invisible, dark, silent, radiating nothing. And yet nothing that has mass can fully hide. Everything with mass pulls. Everything with mass leaves a fingerprint on the motion of its neighbors. And so, again and again, we have learned to see the unseeable by watching what it moves. We do not need to see the wind to know it blows. We see the bending of the grass. Out there, at the edge, the grass is bending. And whether the hand that bends it is a planet, or a black hole, or something we have not yet imagined, its existence teaches us the same terrible and beautiful lesson. Our map is incomplete. Our home is larger and stranger than we know. The dark still holds secrets, patient and massive, waiting at the threshold of our understanding. But let us be honest about the doubt. Not every scientist believes the unseen hand is real. Some argue that the clustering of those distant orbits is an illusion, a trick of where and how we happen to look, that we have found only the objects easiest to find and mistaken the shape of our own searching for the shape of the sky. Perhaps there is no ninth planet. Perhaps the pattern is a mirage, born of our limited view, and the distant worlds are scattered after all. And this, too, is the edge of science. Not the edge in space, the edge in knowledge. The place where the data is thin, where honest minds disagree, where the answer has not yet arrived. It is uncomfortable to stand here. We want certainty. We want to know whether the shadow is real. But the universe does not hand us certainty. It hands us clues and mysteries, and the long, patient work of separating the two. To stand at the edge of the solar system is also to stand at the edge of what we know. And there is a kind of courage in admitting it, in looking into the dark and saying, honestly, we are not sure what is there. The scientist who says, I don't know, is not weak. That admission is the beginning of every discovery ever made. Something is out there, or nothing is. The distant worlds are leaning, or we have only imagined the lean. A planet waits in the dark, or a black hole, or a lesson in our own limits. We do not yet know. And that not knowing, that vast, humbling uncertainty at the very threshold of our home, is perhaps the truest thing we have found at the end of the solar system. Not an answer. A question, immense and unresolved, hanging in the dark, waiting for a species patient enough and humble enough to keep searching. That is where we end, not with certainty, but with wonder. So what in the end waits at the end of the solar system? Not a wall, not a door, not a final tidy line where our world stops and the universe begins. Something stranger, a trembling membrane of dying wind, a frozen graveyard of unborn worlds, a vast spherical shroud of ice reaching a quarter of the way to another star, and a shadow, massive, silent, unseen, bending the distant worlds with a hand we cannot yet name. The edge of the solar system is not an ending. It is a fading, a slow dissolve of home into the dark, where our own comets drift so far from the sun that they belong almost as much to the galaxy as to us. There is no clean border. There is only a thinning, a gradual surrender of the sun's domain to the immense, cold, patient space between the stars. And that, perhaps, is the first great lesson of the edge. The boundaries we imagine are almost always simpler than the truth. We draw our neat lines, where a country ends, where a life begins, where our knowledge stops. And the universe, again and again, dissolves them. It shows us that the world is not made of walls, but of gradients. Not of edges, but of fadings. That everything we think is solid and bounded is, on closer inspection, blurred at its margins, uncertain, still becoming. Even home, even the solar system, even us. Now think of the travelers, 2 spacecraft, built by human hands, launched nearly 50 years ago, still moving outward through the dark. They have crossed the wall of dying wind. They have left the sun's atmosphere behind. They are, right now, the farthest things our species has ever touched. And they are still going, still whispering back to us across the void, their signals growing fainter each year, until one day the whisper will fall silent forever. They will not stop. When their power finally dies, when the last faint signal fades, and we can no longer hear them, they will continue, silent, cold, coasting through the dark at speeds that will carry them past the Oort Cloud, not in years, but in tens of thousands of them. They will drift among the frozen comets. They will pass beyond the last faint reach of the sun's gravity. And then, at last, they will become what nothing human has ever been. Truly interstellar, wanderers between the stars. And here is the thought that stops the breath. Those 2 machines will very likely outlast everything. They will outlast our cities, our languages, our species. They will outlast the Earth itself in some far epoch when the aging sun swells and swallows the inner worlds. Long after there is no one left to remember that we ever existed, those 2 small craft will still be drifting through the galaxy, carrying, etched upon them, a message, a map to our star, the sound of a human voice, the image of a child, the music of a world that once was. We built a bottle, and we cast it into the cosmic ocean. And the ocean is so vast that the bottle may drift for billions of years before another shore ever finds it, if one ever does at all. There is a loneliness in that. But there is also something close to defiance. A small, fragile species, aware of its own smallness, aware that the dark is immense and indifferent, and yet reaching outward anyway. Sending a piece of itself past the edge of its own world, into the silence, on the faint and desperate hope that existence should leave some mark. That we were here, that we looked up, that we wondered. Because that is what we do. We are the part of the universe that wonders about itself. Consider that. The atoms in your body, the calcium in your bones, the iron in your blood, were forged in the hearts of dying stars, scattered across space in ancient explosions, gathered into the cloud that became the sun and the earth, and eventually, you. You are made of the same stuff as the frozen comets at the edge, the same stuff as the distant, unseen worlds. And somehow, that stuff arranged itself into something that could look outward, into the dark from which it came, and ask, what is out there? The Oort Cloud does not wonder. The heliopause does not wonder. The silent shadow bending the distant orbits does not know it is bending them. In all that vastness, all that ice and wind and gravity and dark, we may be among the very few things that can look at the edge of the solar system and feel awe. That is not weakness. That is not smallness. That is the most extraordinary thing in the entire story. And yet, the edge humbles us. It must. Because everything we have seen tonight reminds us how little we know and how small the stage is upon which we play out our entire existence. From the Oort Cloud, the sun is just a star. From a little farther still, the sun would vanish into the crowd entirely, indistinguishable from a billion others. And the earth, the whole of human history, every war and every love, every name ever spoken, is a mote of light too faint to see, circling a dot too faint to find. We are not the center of anything. We never were. But there is a strange grace in accepting that. Because if we are not the center, if we are small and fragile and briefly here, then everything we have becomes precious precisely because it is not guaranteed. The warmth of the sun is a gift, not a right. The shelter of the heliosphere is a fragile bubble, not a fortress. This blue world, held in the thin band of safety between the fire of the star and the cold of the dark, is not the default state of the universe. It is the exception. It is the miracle. The vast majority of the cosmos is what waits at the edge. Silence, cold and dark. Empty space between frozen stones. A shell of ice around a fading star. That is the norm. That is what most of reality is like. And against that immense, indifferent backdrop, a warm world where things grow and think and love is so rare, so improbable, so achingly delicate, that to hold it carelessly is a kind of blindness. The edge of the solar system teaches us to cherish the center. And so we return. From the frozen graveyard, from the shell of shadow, from the trembling wall of dying wind, back across the billions of miles, back past the giant planets, back to a small blue world beneath a warm and ordinary star, the same world you have always known. But perhaps you see it differently now. Look up tonight. The stars you see are not eternal fires in a fixed and finished sky. They are distant suns, each perhaps wrapped in its own shell of shadow, its own frozen graveyard, its own trembling boundary where its wind goes to die. And between them and us lies a dark so vast that our fastest travelers will need tens of thousands of years merely to begin the crossing. We do not know what waits at the end of the solar system. We know the wind dies there. We know the ice drifts there. We know something massive may be hiding there, silent in the dark. But the full truth, the shape of the boundary, the nature of the shadow, the place where home truly ends, remains beyond our grasp. A question still unanswered, a frontier still unmapped, a darkness we have only begun to touch. And maybe that is as it should be. Because a universe with edges we cannot yet reach is a universe that still has somewhere to go. A cosmos still full of mystery is a cosmos that still calls us outward, that still rewards the ones who look up and wonder and refuse to stop asking. The solar system does not end with a wall. It ends with a question, and the question is still ours to answer. The travelers are still moving. The dark is still waiting. And somewhere, tonight, beyond the last dying breath of the sun, the frozen worlds drift on in a silence older than the earth, keeping their secret patient and vast, until the day a small and curious species is finally ready to hear it. We are not there yet, but we are still reaching. And that may be the most human thing of all.